Welcome to the Roundtable Consult. I'm your host, Dr. Mark Williams, and I'm joined by my effervescent and very talented co-host, Attorney Sonia Madison. How you doing, Sonia?
This
Eff-
weather, I don't know how your body responds to weather, but today it was 60 degrees. And when it switches that quickly from, cold to warm, my body doesn't. I feel like my sinuses or whatever just starts flaring up. So sorry, I'm apologizing in advance after that. I've got watery eyes, I'm sniffling. But yeah,
mm,
this weather, it gets me every time.
Maybe you're not so effervescent, man. But
I'll leave that to
hey,
the comments.
it usually gets me going the other way when it goes from warm to cold. And actually, this past weekend was miserable for me. I did the exact same thing. I had, eyes were itching. They eventually swelled till Uh, it was really not a pretty sight. They were swollen, watery. I don't know. You might have seen that on the last show. Maybe you didn't see. Maybe the people didn't catch that. But I was extremely congested on our last show and have been congested all this week. Feel like I'm getting a little bit better now, though. So maybe I'll be able to get a good night's sleep for the first time in about a week.
To be determined.
Yeah.
But it's also kind of a somber day, and I'm sure you've heard about yesterday. And I guess we're doing a little bit of a pre-record, but on Wednesday night, the American Airlines flight crashed into a military helicopter. And I think they reported about 28 people missing. And they're already, and by they, I really just do me, Trump is already placing blame instead of focusing on, again, I know people like to criticize when you start immediately going to thoughts and prayers, but focusing on the victims, because I heard a lot of it has been some US figure skating skaters as well as coaches. And so, it's a
Yeah.
pretty sad moment.
Yeah, it's pretty unfortunate though. It's even more unfortunate again, like I said, that people will take a moment to. I think you were saying it's just a result or consequence of DEI hires and things of that
He
nature.
said,
And
among other things, he blamed Pete Buttigieg. He
yeah,
blamed bias. Yeah, he did. He blamed disability,
yeah,
individuals. But let's take a look at some facts here. First of all, the FAA, the Federal Aviation Administrative Director, was fired. I want to say around January 20th, and we know, of course, Trump is going to put in who they want. We also know there's been funding freezes. So, I mean, that obviously is going to impact a lot of these agencies, as well as the Department of Transportation. We also know that there were hiring freezes. And again, this is stuff that Trump has done. And one of the issues that so far is being reported is that one of the problems is there were not enough air traffic controllers. So if you don't have enough
mhm.
of that and you go through a hiring freeze, and you've got funding freezes, that to me is a little bit more where we should draw blame than saying, oh, it's the previous administration fault. You
Well,
know?
it was interesting. He had a press conference where he's saying that on the website, on the FAA website, it talks about their diversity in hiring and people with disabilities. And he was like, that's a Biden error. And one of the reporters corrected him and said, that's been on the website since 2013 and throughout the entire duration of your first administration. So why was it that you didn't remove that before? Oh, well, it was removed and they added back. Next question, moved on. And I was like, come on,
I
really
know, keep
good.
lying until it becomes the truth, huh?
Or at least until people believe it to be the truth. And
Yeah.
I guess if you tell a lie enough, people eventually start believing, including yourself. So maybe that's his strategy is just keep hammering away at how bad other people are, just so that people can somehow or another think that you're great by comparison. So,
Well, and I guess speaking of DEI hires, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. I mean, don't you find him the most qualified nominee for the Department of Health and Human Services?
they are all qualified. They are, what's his name? Hedge left or whatever his name is.
Yeah, Secretary of Defense guy. Yeah.
Yeah, well, he got in. Robert Kennedy probably will get in himself as well, despite a horrific showing in front of the Congress Senate Judiciary Committee or whatever committee it was supposed to be. But nonetheless, hey, this is what people, the American people voted for. This is what they're getting more of. And I, honestly, I don't think that people voted for this. They voted for, they were talking about their economy. And this is what you get when money becomes your highest priority. And when you economic, my thought has always been this: the economy can't be that bad if people still out spending money. I mean, they are spending money like nobody's business. How bad can it possibly be? Now, maybe they're spending money on credit cards, but that's foolish on your part. But as bad as people felt or thought that the economy was, all the economic markers said that it was different. And so they bought into all the TikTok and social media advertisements. And they said, it's so bad we can't put Kamala back in office and we need Donald Trump at any cost. Well, here's the cost. Time to pay the piper.
Well, you say they didn't vote for this and they voted for against a different economy. I say no, they voted for this because it was very clear during his campaign that he did say he was going to put RFK Jr. in this position. It was very clear in his campaign. He did say he was going to do mass deportation. Very clear in his campaign that he again was going to get rid of a lot of these DEI programs. He was going to do exactly what he's doing. And
Hmm.
and I'm not saying you personally, but us as the American people, we said, okay, we hear you. And there went our vote. And so, I mean, you can try to, spin it with a little bit of empathy, but let's still keep it real because either you do it as Maya Angelou says, when someone shows you who you are, you believe them. Or again, you go right, and I think we discussed on this last time, you let your fears or let the fact that whatever you feel entitled to have is not there and let that drive your voting decision. But either way, neither solutions gives you the outcome that you seek. I do want to make sure our audience knows why I jokingly, but although very seriously, say RFK Jr. is not qualified for the position. And you can definitely tell me as the doctor of the group whether or not this information should be considered when it comes to the Department of Health and Human Services. So he says that he has never reviewed data on vaccination safety. Do you think that makes you qualified?
Well,
He's a very
I
good
mean,
critic of it, but never reviewed the
yeah,
data.
you're very critical of it, and then you think that, and you claim that things should be based on science, but you never reviewed it. Why would it be based on science if you're not going to review it? Makes sense to me. Perfectly good sense.
I know
But
conspiracy theories is what leads him. He also, despite having a financial interest in finding fault in vaccines, will not unequivocally say he will divest or he will remove that financial interest. Your thoughts on
now
that? Will be more
that part
qualified?
was, yeah, even more exactly. Now, I didn't quite get, and I haven't done the research to find out what his financial interest was, but he certainly did dance around the notion, or at least the request or the question whether or not he would divest from some of those and not profit from it. Not only during his time, but also I think it was like for 4 years after his term. So
He also says that Wi-Fi and 5G are links to cancer. I mean, again, make you qualify for this position,
yeah, I don't know. It, for a period of
You don't
time when
know.
COVID,
You don't know. Don't give people
what?
passes. This is the problem. Don't give people passes. And this is
I
the
mean,
problem.
we can run down the list and say that nothing about him qualifies him for this position,
I
other
mean,
than the fact that he said, that he told Donald Trump, "I'm gonna do whatever you say you want me to do, and as long as you give me a couple of pet projects." So
well, so then he also said that AIDS in Africa is different than the AIDS here. Again, I don't know what this means, but maybe you can tell me why I'm missing it. He also said Lyme disease was a military bioweapon.
and he actually admitted to that in the Senate hearing as well. It's like, yeah, yeah, I said that one. Yeah, I can see myself saying that one. I'm like, oh God, please, y'all.
And then to me, which made him, I mean, all of that made him very unqualified, but this one was almost the nail in the coffin. Lacked knowledge of Medicare and Medicaid. I mean, that is like the most important part of the Department of Health and Human Services, and you have no clue what they are and how it works and how they're funded.
I give him a pass on that one.
Oh,
And
wow.
here's the reason why I give him a pass. I give him a pass on that one because I think he might have misspoke. A lot of times when you're under the hot seat and you conflate one thing or another, but he should have been able to come back and clarify that. But he started talking about Medicaid and then started transitioning over to Medicare. Could that have been a flub that he was doing just from the nerves of being in front of interrogated the way that he was? Absolutely could have, but it's hard for me to believe that he doesn't know the difference between Medicaid and Medicare. I mean, you can ask almost anybody off the street, and they pretty much know that.
Well, apparently, this isn't someone you're going to find on the street because I'd imagine you can ask anyone off the street whether Lyme disease is a military bioweapon, or whether Wi-Fi and 5G are links to cancer. I think some of that stuff anyone off the street knows better. But even in that, like he doesn't even know how it's funded. So I'm like, you're about to be in charge of a budget, and you have no clue how these two things are funded. So yeah, like I said, speaking of DEI, I guess this is also what they wanted. And Vivek, and I always can't say his last name, but it's the Hunger Games.
Ramaswamy.
Yeah, there you go. The Hunger Games. He's now been removed
Yeah.
out of the tryst before for several things, I'm sure. But I know one of the things he said was, "Hey, we have an administration, or we have a trend of mediocrity being, celebrated." And they said, "How dare you?"
Let me say this about the vaccines, and this is one of the things that's concerning, and that is that for a period of time, measles and polio were like non-existent in the United States. And I want to say somewhere in the 1980s or 1990s, it was like 92% of children were vaccinated. And then if you go back a couple of decades later, we're down into the 80% or so. And in order to really get herd immunity, you probably have to have about 95% of a population vaccinated. And so what we started was seeing was a little recrudescence or a recurrence of conditions like the measles and polio. I mean, when was the last time you saw somebody or heard somebody who had polio? Not in my lifetime, but people are now being diagnosed with polio. And the issue that we also have is that you got like I can't remember what RFK's response to the bird flu question was, at this point. But it's something that's going around right now. What are we going to do about that? And I think if you don't have government, if you don't have leaders who advocate and are encouraging the population to comply with a certain communal activity that's for our shared benefit and that requires our shared participation, then we're headed down a pathway where we're going to be consumed by a bunch of infectious diseases that we had once conquered. We're starting to see them rise again, and people are going to start dying from measles again. Go figure that one.
Yeah, I think I read somewhere that there might be a tuberculosis, I think I said outbreak, and I can't remember where it was, but I'm reading a lot of articles that are saying there's a lot of outbreaks come in. And speaking of, the consumption of something, we had the press secretary say, "Hey, I want to invite podcasters and other news media into the press room." And I want to say over 200 or 300 press passes were denied. And she said, "I want to open that back up." And I mean, for me, there's a reason why there should be some standards. I mean, I understand that a lot of people have kind of a distrust, but if you take away all standards, there's just nothing to determine what is even closer to truth than what isn't. And so now
Well,
you're about to open this floodgates to conspiracy theorists coming in, to, all kinds of, and let's be clear, this is going to be Trump. So it's not going to be a balance of news that's going to be in that station, that room. It's going to be news that is tailored and going to speak favorably on him.
yeah.
And so that to me is going to be very concerning as well.
Two things I want to say about that. The press secretary who said there's no wokeness in this place. And I'm sitting there thinking, like, does she not realize that she's a recipient of DEI?
Right.
The biggest recipients of the biggest beneficiaries of diversity, equity, inclusion are white women. Hello, you are a beneficiary of DEI. I'm sorry you don't like to believe it, but what's happened is that they've weaponized DEI to make it to be anti people of color. It's like any way that you can try and anti-wokeness. I'm like, come on now. When is it ever a bad idea to be considerate of your fellow man? And frankly, that's all wokeness really is to really give additional consideration to people who you might have caused harm in the past, and to understand how some of those interactions adversely affect them. But anyway, I digress. The, the thing that I wanted to mention first was about her just being the recipient of the DEI. And then the other part about it was what were we talking about, the White House? I forgot what my
Opening
other
up
point
to, I
was.
guess, more news outlets. Were you gonna discuss that part?
Yes. Yes. So that's right. So I don't know that I'm gonna be the devil's advocate here.
Oh, what else is
And you
there?
said, consensus doesn't necessarily mean conciseness or veracity. Just because there is a consensus of people's belief and acceptance of what is true doesn't make it actually true. And what we have experienced in the past was a presentation of truth that came only from a group of people who controlled the narrative. Is it fine now for variety of people to control a narrative and for people who consume that information to discern for themselves what is truth? Because you and I know that the history books didn't always present the truth. And we are now uncovering some of the same truth that if we did not allow them the opportunity to share that information, you and I would still be in the dark about a lot of the other things. Some of the things that just went over Lake Lanier or Black Wall Street, things that they did try to hide and have been successful in hiding for decades and generations, but are being uncovered because there are quote unquote investigative reporters. And sometimes these are independent people. The problem is that you can never verify it. And you can't verify what the mainstream media provides, feeds you as well. So I don't know that. I mean, let me say I could see why people would be supportive of opening up to other forms of media, but I also see the harm and the danger in that as well.
Well, I want to say two things. One, there are certain things you can verify. Like I can verify that Donald Trump said grab them by the
You can't
because
verify that. That
there's
could be
audio.
AI.
There's audio or whatever.
There's
Well, but he
deep
even but
fakes.
he never denied. I mean, one thing if he himself said, no, that's not me, but he never even denied it. I can also verify that he was found liable on defamation. I can also verify that he was convicted in New York. I mean, there are things that are verifiable. Now,
But you
understand,
can't verify that those weren't witch hunts, and that those weren't the
but the
actions
point,
of a
but see,
deep state.
that's the problem with to me with what you're trying to do. There are things that are verifiable, but now if you want to go around and keep finding, well, how far back does it need to be verified? Because I agree with you when it comes to history. Yeah, we are still getting to some degree a one-sided view or a certain skewed view of history. Now, that doesn't mean George Washington wasn't the first president. Okay, we can accept that. But it does mean that, to your point, whether he was this greatness is to some degree of perception, and to some degree, it's not all fully reported. So there are things you can verify. But like, if you want to be that person that says, well, yeah, you can verify that that was a conviction, but can you verify whether or not that conviction was blah, 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 blah? Well, I mean,
I asked a lot
now
of
you're
black
moving the
people.
needle post. But the
Listen,
problem is you've got certain people that are even not willing to accept what has been verified. And that to me is why you do need to have standards when it comes to journalism. Not everyone's a journalist. Now, yes, there are a lot of people that are commentators. Yes, there are a lot of people that are opinion writers. And yes, even there are a lot of journalists who will put their view in there. But let's not make it seem as if when you go study journalism, you are not being taught certain standards or certain means by which you verify something versus just going off a conspiracy theory or just going off putting out information just for the sake of creating doubt.
the same just I'm going to use that same example that you said, verifiable that he was, found liable for sexual assault. and for the other crimes that he was accused of. The reality is that our justice system has always been biased. And you know, as a black person, that it has usually been biased toward us. And just because it can be weaponized, just because it historically has been weaponized only against people of color, doesn't mean that it can't be weaponized against people who represent a threat, whatever kind of threat you want to consider that. It could be a threat to democracy. It could be a threat to the deep state. It could be a threat to the pedophilia rings, whatever those people who support Trump might believe that is. But the reality is that you can't verify that the information and the allegations that were made against him for which he was convicted were true.
But again, you can verify he was convicted. Now, if you want to start in that article by saying, yes, he was convicted, and then go into, but now is the justice system fair? Where there's some bias, fine. Include that in your whole story. But it
Mhm.
still remains that you can verify he was convicted. I mean, that
Yeah.
just
So
is
were
what
the
it
Central Park
is.
Five. So were the Central Park Five.
And again, you couldn't verify, yes, they were convicted. And that becomes, again, part of the story of how again, sometimes the justice system is unjust. Because again, we verify he was convicted. And even in that, that was also overturned. And so we can also then verify that those convictions were also overturned. Again, you can mix in facts with your opinion, no doubt. But there are also people who do not put in the facts. And that is a problem. Like, you still got to put in the facts, even if you feel like the facts, the conclusions that were made were biased, still tell the whole story.
Well,
That's
that's
all
the
I'm
problem.
saying.
That's the problem that they have is that they will say that the whole story isn't being told. They're telling you that the only parts of the story is being told because they have this vendetta
But no,
against
that's
Donald
not the
Trump.
problem. The problem is like, again, you're saying AIDS in Africa is different than AIDS in America. The
I'm,
problem is you're saying Wi-Fi and 5G has links to cancer. The problem is you're saying that Lyme disease is a military bioweapon. That to me has no basis in any facts. You're just spewing out conspiracy theories. And when someone asks you, hey, have you looked at the data on vaccines and how the safety risk, and you say no, well, then I don't want you being the journalist because
well,
you are
that's
at
true.
least not
I don't, I
looking
don't,
at the data.
I
You
don't
are
dispute that.
refusing to see the data.
I don't dispute that. My point simply is that when we are fed information by a small group of people who always control the narrative or historically has controlled the narrative, now that media is now social and more people can now tell the story, you can't control what information gets out. And some of that information is the actual hidden truth, but some of it is also fabrication. And it's increasingly difficult to verify which is which or to discern which is which. And so what do you do? Do you still stifle the expression of those that may be contrary to you, but may actually be speaking truth? Because that's what they've done in the past. They've taken stories and squashed them. The whole this catch and kill piece with Donald Trump and the other gentleman who owned the magazines. The catch and kill. The truth was out there, but they said, "Oh, let me go ahead and catch that and squash it." But unfortunately now, or fortunately, depending on your perspective, those stories can't be caught and killed anymore because we got free press. When I say free press, I mean it's social media. Everybody can free and share any kind of information.
You have the freedom to call yourself press. And then again, one of the things that bothers me, and this is the most important part, is it'd be different if you had a president or a leader or leadership that wasn't trying to be fascist, that wasn't trying to say, I need y'all to call me king. That wasn't trying to say, I need to have the ability to do whatever I want to do without any type of checked, authority. And so to me, this is your way of trying to control who gets in that room and ensuring that, hey, have you kissed my ring? MSNBC, you got to have someone to kiss the ring if you want to come to this press conference, and that to me becomes the problem.
And that's your perspective. But I will guarantee you,
That is my truth.
I can
I mean,
guarantee
let's
you,
ask those people who were hurricane victims, and what was the information I was getting out there? Oh, that the money that was reserved for you is supposed to go to immigrants. That is very harmful, and that is something that Donald Trump says. And then if you, as Donald Trump is going to ensure, you only have media in there that will perpetuate that story. That again is a detriment to the American people because they don't know that they have access to funding to help them during this crisis.
yeah, but there are millions, tens of millions of Americans who will say Donald Trump is not trying to be a fascist. He's trying to get rid of the fascists. He's trying to restore democracy to its right standing.
And that's
There are millions of them who are trying to say
their
that he's
truth.
trying to get
Let's
rid
have
of
both
the
rooms in the table.
corrupt.
And that's their truth. So let's have both people in the press conference. But that to me is the problem, is that he won't put both people in there.
And Biden and every other one did the same thing too.
So they didn't.
A
There
lot
was
of
plenty of
times,
Fox News stuff that was
yeah,
in.
but a lot
So
of times they
don't
would never
even
get.
try
A lot of
it.
times they would not get
Don't
called
even
on.
try. Oh
There were a
yes,
lot of
they
times
did.
they would not get called on. They
Oh
would
yes,
not.
they did. Every day, Karine had comments from Fox News. Oh, are you cannot
I'm
be
just saying.
serious. And
I'm just saying.
Obama actually went on
No,
Fox News.
you're talking about, and I'm talking about about Biden. Biden himself would not take hard questions from uh, unfriendly media. So you're talking about his White House press secretary. Yeah, they came into there as well. But how many questions did Biden take from those who opposed him from Fox or from OA or whatever
Well, I
right
don't know how
wing
frequently
media?
Biden was in there, but anyways, I did want to hit on something you said earlier about the, to some degree, lack of empathy, because it went into perhaps a topic that I really want to explore more. Selena Gomez, who is, pop star, singer, she's also of Mexican descent. She posted a video crying amid the ICE immigration. I can't even think what the C stand for. Anyways, raids, and pretty much said, my people are getting attacked. And I think she had a Mexican flag on there. Received a lot of backlash. Even think one of the senators said, hey, you need to be deported. And again, she is born here. And I do also want to clarify something that we brought up last week. The amendment says born or naturalized. And so if you've got the born or naturalized in the United States, if you're born here, that's your birthright citizenship. But anyways, she was born here, although she does have relatives and family that were born or at least immigrated from Mexico. So she took down the video and later said, apparently it is not okay to show empathy for people. And I wanted to get your thoughts. You think that's really the problem right now, is people having a lack of empathy for others?
I think the Bible tells us that that's going to happen. It says that iniquity would increase and the hearts of man would wax cold. And that's what we're seeing what's happening is in the end times, people just lack empathy. I watched the video and it was just a video of a woman who worked at a convenience store and just how many people came into that store and were just flat out rude. And, she spoke to him like, what the hell for you to get? I mean, it was just, I mean, she got cussed out so many times that day, and so many people just flat out right rude to her for no apparent reason. It's just that people, I think, are just becoming increasingly heartless. And you're right, lack of empathy. But I think the scripture describes it. It said the hearts of men are waxing cold. And I don't know how you change that. I don't know that you can change it. You just expect it. And you learn how to deal with it.
Well, I think the problem is more so a lack of humility. And I know sometimes you can maybe conflate the two. But to me, when I think of empathy, I think of, hey, you can relate or you may have an understanding of the other person. And I don't doubt that a lot of people, particularly people in the majority spaces, do feel as if, hey, I should be in a better position than others. And I don't doubt that empathy that people have is what got, partly what Trump in office. But to me, the humility is saying, hey, I don't deserve what I have. I'm blessed that I have it, but it's not because of something that I've earned, or it's not because of a color of my skin. It's that recognition that I'm blessed for having it, not that, I've blessed because I've deserved it. And I think
Mhm.
that to me is what's the problem here, is that everyone feels like they're entitled to everything versus having this humility that, hey, I'm no more entitled to this and this are. And yes, we like to have this idea that if I work hard, I should be able to get it. But if you don't get it, it shouldn't be, oh, let me blame someone and let me find other people who empathize with that blame so that we can all come together and put someone in office. It really should be, hey, that wasn't meant for me. Hey, yeah, I would like that, but that's not something that I am entitled to have. And so I just wish, to me, I think it's a humility problem more so than an empathy problem.
Well, do you have to have the humility to be empathetic?
Well, that's what I say. I can understand you conflate the two. I don't think you have to have humility to be empathetic.
Hmm.
Uh, and so now I do think if you are humble, then you're likely are empathetic. But I don't think that just because you're empathetic, you're humble.
I do think that the key part of it, like you said, is entitlement. And unfortunately, I think the government probably does, feed into some of that entitlement. I mean, frankly, we got government programs that they call entitlement programs. So you say, I deserve this. And then to some extent, I think it's necessary that the government does protect its people against, I think, the wiles of capitalism, because if the government does not protect the citizens against, I think, the ways of capitalism, then the general population continues to get exploited. How does one who has to pay $3,000 a month in child care, but they only make $4,000 a month? They don't even make $4,000 a month in income. How do you rationalize going to work? You don't. So then you say, well, we're just going to stay at home because we'd be poor if I went to work. And so you got government programs that says, okay, well, hey, we're going to help subsidize some of your daycare, some of your childcare expenses, so you can get out and start working. The other way to do that is for the government to say, hey, there's got to be a minimum wage. You have to be able to make this amount of money. If we see that the trends toward the trends of daycare rates are raising too high, are going too high, or the cost of living is going too high, and you need to have a certain amount of money in order to be able to live comfortably above the stages of poverty. So I do think that the government has a role and an obligation in providing some protections for its citizens. But there is a school of thought that says those people become too entitled, and so that they feel like they can stay at home and don't have to work, even when they can work. Your kids go to school during the daytime. You got school age children. You can get to work at this point, and you're still sitting at home. So why are you still not working? So we do become a little bit entitled there. I was thinking about, I was talking to a friend, or well, didn't really talk to a friend. I saw a friend posted something on Facebook, and she would present it to the hospital. And the person in the hospital was incredibly rude to her. And her perception was that the nurse was thinking like she was making up her illness. She's like, I literally could not breathe. And, that person needs to work on their compassion and everything. And my thought immediately, and I always get in trouble because I always defend people. And uh,
You're
say
always
that
in
again.
trouble, of course. I said, of
I'm
course you're
always in
always in
trouble.
trouble. Always in
But
trouble.
because I like to try to find out where's this other person coming from, if I can. And when I'm in the emergency department, I don't dispute the fact if this person is responding with this lack of compassion and lack of empathy, sympathy for somebody, even, then probably they need to be removed. But then I would ask the question, why are they responding that way? The people in healthcare, particularly in the emergency department, get burned out a lot. So it sounds like this person could be dealing with burnout. And if this person is really dealing with burnout, were you less empathetic toward them because of their rudeness towards you? Because a lot of times we don't see ourselves as being unempathetic when we're the recipient end of it. But you can look at that same situation and say, that person probably has got a lot going on right now. I know that the work that they're doing right now is pretty demanding, pretty psychologically stressing. Um, Maybe they're having some issues with burnout, and give them just a little bit of grace. There's a nurse practitioner that used to work for me. She used to sell EGR. extra grace required, and so I think if we even got it to the point where we adopted that philosophy, a little extra grace required, because I don't really know what they're going through. And honestly, I probably need a little extra grace too, because I understand now
Probably.
what.
You're always in trouble and you probably need
No, I'm talking about in terms of being snappy at people, because lately I've become a little bit more snappy just from burnout, from just being tired of dealing with the same thing over and over and over. I don't ever want to get to the point where my heart grows cold. But the reality is that if you don't guard your heart against becoming that way, and you're not attentive enough to your own self psychological care, you can find yourself losing empathy as well.
Well, one of the things you said that I think perhaps we can explore a little bit more too is you said, hey, you think government should be responsible for protecting its people. And to me, when I look at the different parties, they both have a different view on what that protection looks like. I mean, if we're talking about the Republican Party, who's about small government, there, particularly when it comes to the federal government, they see the federal government in particular as, hey, let's protect our people when it comes to foreign affairs. They don't see it as, hey, let's protect our people to make sure they can go to childcare. Um, Now, and we talk about this all the time. Now, again, well, Democrats, they see more of a big government. So they do look like, hey, the federal government should be about putting a minimum wage, should be about giving the tax credits. It's a little different. And again, I'm not saying one's right or wrong, because to some degree, you do have people that will say, yes, I need this. But then you have other people that say, hey, you're burdening me with taxes, so you can do this. So I need you to remove some of these programs so I'm not burdened with taxes. And so then in that vein, it becomes, well, which is more important? Making sure people don't have to spend so much money in taxes just so we can provide these programs, or making sure these programs are available. We can debate that all day long. My point is, I don't know. I feel like you're defining the protection to be making sure we can afford a basic need. Whereas I don't know if that is, particularly when we're talking about the Republican Party, or we're talking about even this current administration, as we see that they are trying to not only reduce their workforce, as we also see again with this plane happening and they're ready to divert this to someone else. But I just don't know if they feel like protection of the public is the same as, hey, let's make sure that they can afford the price of eggs, even though we know that that's what they campaigned on. And I know we've talked about this before. We're in a capitalist society. And to some degree, to say, hey, our government should make sure that our people are protected from excessive, I guess, spending, or protected from inflation or whatnot, that kind of can go against being a capitalist society, where to some degree that say, hey, this every man for itself, we just want to make sure you have the opportunities to be able to earn a certain amount of money, not making sure that you, again, have a roof over your head. And so, I mean, that was one thing that you said that I feel like we got to touch on. But another thing that, again, I'm seeing with this administration, and to some degree, I mean, you can probably decide if it was a good thing or not, but with this mass deportation, we saw, and I think, what was it, the Colombia president that
Hmm.
sent the flight back. And then Trump said, all right, I'm gonna put some tariffs on.
Hmm.
And then all of a sudden, okay, well, we'll bring that flight on back over here. And I know a lot of people said, hey, that's what we're talking about. But again, when we're still talking about empathy, humility, and all this, one, he's massing up people, and I think the numbers is maybe like 50% of them may have some type of criminal history, but they're not truly ensuring that everyone that they're deporting is being deported for some kind of criminal history. But also, again, that's some people argue that that is not the protection that we're looking for in terms of you going in and separating families, particularly without showing that, hey, these are harmless or harmful criminals. And so I don't know. I mean, I just think even in saying, hey, what the government is supposed to do, even that people still see that it's different. And it's hard to determine, which side or which then are you entitled to from your government when everyone still looks at that differently.
Yeah. That was only one example. I think the government has a role to protect its citizens from a variety of things, from foreign invasion, from foreign attacks. They have from attacks from companies. I think some of the regulations, the Occupational Safe and Health Act, those are protections. The formation and the permission of labor unions and things of that nature, and granting them powers that they need to be able to have to protect laborers from exploitation of their employers. That's there. EEOC, which is now about to leave.
Yeah,
Those
I
things
was
were
gonna
there.
say I could everything you're saying, I can say, well, I don't know if
It's getting ready to go.
people really want that from government anymore. Because we're still a government
Mhm.
for the people, and all that. And if the people are saying, no, I don't want the DEI programs. No, I don't want, the whatever it is. I can't even think of all the craziness that Trump voted for. If people are saying, I don't want those protections, what I just want is the ability to be mediocre and still get the highest level position over an outstanding, person of color, then I mean, do we look at what the people are saying they want, or do we say, hey, disregard what they want to because certain people know better as to how, to ensure, like you said, we're not attacked by foreign adversaries. Again, you start removing yourself from the Paris Agreement, you're ignoring the fact that climate change is real. You start removing us from the World Health Organization, you're ignoring the fact that we do need to work internationally and globally when it comes to viruses. And if people are celebrating that, then hey, I'm not sure if we know what it is that we want from our government.
I think the root of it is self-centeredness. And I think we just were talking, I made this, provocative statement once that says selfies are killing America. And the reality of it is that it's not the idea of taking a picture of yourself constantly, but it's the whole focus on self, me. My daughter was like 3 years old. We used to say something. We were like, "Who's it all about?" And make her say, me. And unfortunately, that's where we are as a country. That's who it's all about right now. It's about me, and me. And so if I can't get the things that I want to get, then I certainly don't want to have to spend money to help somebody else get uh, a third of what I currently have. And if you're going to tax me so that this person can have certain protections, no, I want to be able to enjoy everything that I can enjoy. This whole notion of, I always hate, it bothers me, it makes my skin curl when I hear people say, I deserve it. I deserve it. And and I get where some of that's coming from, where you're saying, hey, you need to, have some self-affirmation and know your worth and all this other stuff. But the reality is that there are a lot of people who deserve things more than you deserve it, and they got a fifth of what you got, or maybe even less than that of what you got. And so I'll tell people, listen, I'm blessed a lot far beyond my deserving. I don't deserve it. I'm grateful that I do have it. But I recognize the limits of my own limitations. Yeah, I am hardworking. Yes, I have some facility and doing certain things. I have some level of intellect that allows me and affords me opportunities to be able to excel in certain areas. Yes, I've got all of those things. But you know what? There are plenty of other people who got all those and more. I look at just being down here in Nashville alone. You look at how many incredibly talented musicians. I mean, play 4 or 5 different instruments well, all of them, and can sing any of these major artists under the table, but they don't get opportunities. They're still stuck singing in some of these alleyways. I don't know if you ever went to saw somebody on the street singing or performing, and you're like, my God, this person is homeless, and they're singing and they're killing it, and they should have a recording contract somewhere. You telling me that that person doesn't deserve it? No, I think a lot of times we get opportunities that we don't often deserve. Sometimes those are afforded to us by birthright privilege, and or by privilege of the color of our skin. Sometimes they're given to us by, legacy because we've got associations. Our family, our parents had such benefits, or we've got the right connections. But sometimes people are just giving those things just because I like to think that all the time they're giving it just because God showed grace upon you in that moment. But God has been taken out of the picture now. It's all about, hey, pull yourself up by the bootstraps, and it's all about me, me, me. And this is why that America First policy has resonated with so many people. I've long thought this. I said, there's no way that we are going to be able to enforce our borders and still be consider ourselves the world's humanitarian police. It's going out the door. The mere fact that you're about to militarize what should be local law enforcement duties tells me that you don't care about the humanity of what you're doing. And so, but if we look at other countries who do certain things like that, we always turn our nose up at them and say, "Hey, we need to sanction them, put some kind of enforcements against them, against their ability to trade with us, whatever." We're losing our credibility as a humanitarian police of the world.
Well, I want to take it a step further because to some degree, I don't even mind that you're selfish. What I do mind is that you're oppressive. And I think you were kind of getting in that, but to me, it's when your selfishness makes you oppress other people that I think you're taking it too far. By all means, if you want to, because we all have a degree of selfishness, and that's fine. We're not all of the same faith, but it's the oppressive part that then gets me. I mean, especially when you are essentially going to use, and I know you can argue that, well, for some people that is true. Some people do think DEI programs are putting people who are not qualified in office. And no matter how often I can give you stats, no matter how often I can remind you that it is white women that are the most, beneficial of these programs, no matter how often I can remind you that, hey, when the poorest of our people are doing well, it also helps you much more than when they're doing poorly. No matter how often we can say that. If you are so convinced on the conspiracy theory that this program or these initiatives are what makes you, or is the reason why you can't get what you want to get, then to me, this isn't about a selfishness. This is about you being oppressive. And that is where then I have a problem. And that to me is why Donald Trump won. It wasn't so much about, hey, let's put America first, as it was about, hey, let's blame all these people for why you can't get what you want to get. So let's be oppressive. And that to me,
Now they would argue that it's not oppressive. How would they?
I
How
know
would,
they
for
would, and that's
example,
what I'm saying. I know that they would argue that. I would
so
disagree
what
with
would be your rebuttal against that then? They say that
my
how is it
rule is
oppressive? How is it
blaming
oppressive to get rid of DEI programs?
because again, like I said, I can argue all day long how DEI programs does not mean less qualified people are getting those roles. You're
Mhm.
not going to be convinced otherwise. So there's no point in me giving out the data. Again, it's like going back to RFK Jr. If you're not even going to read the data on the vaccines and their safety, then there's no sense in me trying to convince you otherwise. And
Well,
going even with what Donald Trump is saying, like, oh, let's blame the immigrants for why Hurricane Katrina or why FEMA doesn't have aid for the victim of Hurricane Katrina. Now, no matter how often you had so many news outlets saying, hey, that is false news. Hey, that is not true. You still gonna have people convinced that FEMA money was going to immigrants instead of being helpful, even the cats and dogs, no matter how
again, but how is
often.
that oppressive? But how is that oppressive
Because
though?
you're
How
now
is
oppressing
how is it
immigrants. Because
stopping
you
you
are
from
oppressing immigrants. You are now
what
there's a movement to oppress immigrants in that vein.
oppressing? Oppressing how? How are they being oppressed? If I tell a story,
Okay,
if
you
I
don't
tell a lie,
understand how the president of the United States
I'm
blaming
just
groups
asking you.
of
Listen,
people. I know,
I'm
but
not
that's
saying
what
that
I'm
I
saying. That I
disagree with
can't,
you.
I
I'm
can't.
not
But
saying
that's
that I
all I'm saying. That
disagree with you.
I don't know how
I'm
else I can
asking you to defend it.
articulate. And that's what I'm saying. I don't know how else to articulate it because if you
That's the
don't
point.
see it,
It's
if you
hard
don't
to
see
it's
it from the highest position and the influence that this person has, that has created a movement that has allowed him in office, and now we're seeing the mass deportations that some of which have nothing to do with criminal activity. We're seeing him get rid of DEI programs. We're seeing him freeze hiring. We're seeing the effects. And if that is not enough to convince you how influence can oppress a group of people, there's nothing I can
Again,
articulate to give it to
I
you.
I'm not saying that I disagree with you. All I'm saying is that if we're going to convince a group of people that some of their actions are oppressive, we have to be able to identify precisely how it is oppressive. So if using some of the
But
examples
that's
that you
you're
put out,
assuming that that group of people is going to listen. If you are not willing
even
to,
still,
no,
whether
that
they
does
listen to
matter
it or
because
not,
if you're
whether
not
they listen
willing
to
to
it or not, you
listen,
still have to have a
it's like
salient
what the Bible
argument.
says. It's like the Bible, don't argue with a fool. If you're not willing to listen, then I'm not going to sit here and argue with you. I'm
Okay,
not
that's
going to
fine.
convince you with you. I'm not going to be
That's
convinced.
fine. But my thing is that you have to be able to have an account for your own conviction, whether somebody else listens to it or not.
And I'm
Now,
saying I do. I've
if
given
you
you the
cannot,
account,
if you
but I'm
can't, then
saying if
just
you
show
don't
me.
recognize that
But
those are
you're not
accounts, then
defining
there's
what
nothing more I
oppression
can
is.
say.
What are you defining? How are you defining oppression?
Oppression is, again, you are putting down, you are hindering, you are placing barriers and obstacles based solely on like race, based solely on national origin, based solely on gender. That is oppression. There's a difference, again, between racism and prejudice. Prejudice just has, yes, you have prejudged notions, but oppression is you are putting actions in place to harm a group of people simply because of their protected status.
Okay,
And that is
so
what we saw Donald Trump do during his entire campaign.
okay, so question for you then. How is it then that getting rid of DEI program oppresses people, a group of people? Because in their minds, the point will be, hey, now it's just open to whoever's the most competitive candidate. And if you didn't get it, perhaps you just weren't the most, perhaps you just have to work
And
harder,
again,
is
that's
what
what
the
I'm
other guy
saying.
said.
I then can't convince you because you're already convinced of a lie that has never been true. It has never been true that the less qualified candidate got the job. Never been true. It has never been true
Well,
that
then it
this
shouldn't matter if
person
the
that,
program is in there. If the most qualified person is getting the job, then if and the person who's getting the job are not less qualified,
but
then they should be equally competitive, though,
even in
right?
that statement, even in that statement, that presumes that before DEI programs were put in place, the most qualified candidate was getting the job. That's not true, but you're not even going to be able to see that. So that's what I'm saying, that I can't convince you. You have to be open to recognize that, hey, I've got some falsities here. Let me be open to hearing the fact that maybe what I have learned is wrong. But if you're not willing to do that because you're already throwing the presumption that, oh, well, DEI meant less qualified candidates were getting it, well, then there's nothing more I can say because I'm telling you, no, before DEI, less qualified candidates were getting it.
Well,
But
what I'm saying
DEI
to you,
at
what
least
I'm saying
makes
to you is if your argument is that the people who are getting it according to DEI are as or better qualified, then the argument should be that getting rid of the programs shouldn't impact it because those very well qualified people should still be standing out above
and if
the other
racism
ones.
didn't exist in America, then yes, that wouldn't be an issue.
That
But
wouldn't be an
again,
issue.
I wouldn't be able to convince people that racism exists in America because again, they wouldn't see it. And I think, and even to determining a qualification is some degree subjective because for some positions, having a diverse set of experience and backgrounds makes you more qualified than just having a certain degree.
Mm.
But again, like that, and I don't think people recognize qualifications to some degree subjective.
It is. And it's not confined to just a score on a test. It's not confined to the fact that you might have had a previous position. But my thought is this, my position is this, and that is that if you probably will never really be able to accept or understand the effects or the presence of oppression unless you have been oppressed yourself. And those persons who have never been or who have not been oppressed will get to the point where they're saying, "Hey, it's kind of hard for me to buy this argument that something that I'm doing is oppressing to you." My rule of thumb is this: it is the one who's oppressed that gets to determine the action of the oppression, not the oppressor. Because the oppressor will always look at his or her actions and say, no, this is not holding you back. And that's because their perspective is limited. And when they have a limited perspective based off of their position of privilege, they'll never be able to see that. And so what it comes back to what we were talking about before is having this notion or the issue of lack of empathy. And as we go through a country who is now becoming less and less empathetic, whose hearts are growing colder and colder, we've got fewer people being able to see the consequences of their own actions. And when you can't see the consequence of your own action and how it's adversely impacting those around you, your best option, if you care to be compassionate in any way, shape, or form, your best option is to sit and listen to those who are impacted by your actions. Unfortunately, it takes a lot more humility, as you were saying earlier, Sonia, about the lack of humility. It takes more humility to sit down and say, hey, there may be something that I'm doing that is adversely affecting you. And I don't think we're going to ever get to that point. I do think that we are getting to the place where we start looking at border enforcement. In order to enforce the borders, we're becoming and more inhumane in how we treat them. And that's the message that I think Donald Trump wants to give to the people who are trying to cross the border, and it seems to be working right now. But the question is that the way that we want to be seen as Americans? Are we projecting now that we have, as a country, as a nation of people, lost our humanity? And once we have lost our own humanity, can we then preach to the other countries that embrace oppression based off of gender, based off of religion, based off of any number of things? We're becoming just like all the rest of them. So, with that said, I don't know where we go from here. I don't know where we go from here, but what we need to do, maybe as a nation, we need to have one of what the Bible calls a solemn assembly and get to the point where we actually repent for our selfishness and for our lack of empathy. But I'm a pessimist. I've become a dark cloud lately. I've become the one who's Debbie Downer to say, hey, listen, folks, this is the way that it's going. And only reason why I say that is because that's what the Bible says is happening.
So the hearts of men are waxing cold. Um, that's just the way that we are at this point. So anyhow, I think we've lost Sonya here for a moment, but I'm so glad that you all are tuned in to the Roundtable Consult every week. We encourage you to catch us here every Saturday morning at 10 a.m. Central Standard Time, 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. You can also catch us on our YouTube channel, listen to us on your favorite podcast listening platform, or you can catch us again on Star Radio. Until next week, have a blessed day.